Alright, as I mentioned in part 1, the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to with this Black Pit Let's Play is a chance to use a custom party for a change. I actually came across the Baldur's Gate series whilst playing Avalon 3, which is my favourite in the epic RPG series. And one of the things that I loved about the Avalon series was the chance to create a custom party and essentially create your own story with your own cast of heroes. And of course, creating interesting, exciting, and compelling stories is the main thing that keeps me interested in games, even if they're not RPGs. So I initially intended to do the same with Baldur's Gate, until veteran players convinced me to give the NPC companions a chance. And I'm extremely grateful for that now, because I honestly cannot imagine playing Baldur's Gate without the likes of Imorn and Jaheira in my party. And the banters and NPC interactions in Baldur's Gate 2 is probably a big part of the enduring appeal of these games. However, the Black Pits provides an ideal opportunity to play around with an entirely custom party of my own creation. So I've created a party here composed of characters that all have some personal significance for myself.
Yes?
Let's start with Lilly. Lilly, of course, is borrowed from the Misadventures of Lilly Black, which is an excellent collection, I guess, of Let's Plays by Tord from the YouTube channel My Name Is Not Lilly. And as I've said on a number of occasions, the concept of my channel was very much inspired by what Tord did with the Misadventures of Lilly Black, where through role-playing Lily's decisions through a number of games, including the Baldur's Gate Vanilla full saga, really brought this character to life. Even though she is, as you can see, lawful evil, and did some clearly despicable things, he was able to provide some depth to the character, really bring her to life, and in a way that I think viewers almost sympathized, and I guess even to an extent pitied her. And so, and it impressed me to such an extent that I was inspired to, I guess, emulate Tord, and I set up my own channel dedicated to Jin, who I'll talk about in a bit more detail later. But given that my channel is very much a homage to the much more talented, to be honest, Tord, then I thought it'd be fitting if I included Lilly in this company, and also gave her the honor of the position of party leader, which actually fits her personality well compared to the rest of the group that I have here. She, being an elf, is easily the oldest member of the party, and also probably the most experienced, and also has the confidence and, I guess, force of personality to be leader. There's also a very, I guess, gameplay reason why I've made her the party leader. That's because, of course, only the party leader is able, or the protagonist, is able to use a familiar. And of course, Duke, Lily's imp, was a significant part of Tord's Let's Plays, and I couldn't really justify not having Duke alongside Lily, so naturally she is going to be the leader, and as soon as we can find a summon familiar scroll, we'll have Duke summoned by Lily's side. Now, in terms of gaming mechanics, Lily is got the exact same stats that Tord rolled for her in the very first episode of his, or the very first video rather, of his epic full saga for Lily through the Baldur's Gate games, and I know that he made her into a wild mage for Baldur's Gate 2, but to be honest, I didn't think it fit her personality that well, and obviously she was just a a pure generalist mage at the beginning of Baldur's Gate 1. So that's how I'll have Lilly implemented, I guess. And also, I guess it's worth mentioning that even though Lilly is going to be the party leader, for whatever roleplay that I do, it's going to be done from the perspective of Jin, because he is, after all, the protagonist of my channel. Okay, next up we have Heindrich Lowen. I'm not entirely sure if I pronounced that correctly. I think it's obviously supposed to be a name of Germanic origins, although actually I first came across this name from the rulebook for Advanced Hero Quest, which is a tabletop game. It's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, and it's based on the Warhammer Fantasy setting. And the reason why this character is significant to me is because Heindrich was the very first character that I played in the very first role-playing game that I've ever played when I was about 10 years old, I think. And at 10 years old, I wasn't creative enough to come up with a character of my own, so I just used the example party included in the rulebook. And somehow, because I guess the other characters in the party of 4 were a wood elf, a dwarf, and a wizard, an old wizard, I somehow identified the most with Heindrich, who is pretty much just your standard human warrior. And I ended up using the name for all sorts of other games over the years, and at some stage I added a D into the name. Obviously a typo that kind of stuck, and as a result he's I guess got an honored place within this party as Lilly's bodyguard. And you notice that I've made him lawful good. I've not really played any games where I roleplayed him with any great care, so it's more or less a just picked because I made him a cavalier and that's the default alignment. Because I haven't really given his personality too much thought in the past, to be honest, and he's varied quite a lot depending on what games I've been playing. But in this game I've made him a cavalier, not because I think of him as some sort of paladin type figure. I very much do think of him as just a warrior, a standard fighter, but I made him a cavalier so that he will remain relevant and useful throughout the entire saga, because at the throughout the entire playthrough, because at the higher levels that I expect to see in the Black Pits 2, a standard vanilla warrior becomes a little bit useless, for want of a better word, and whereas I think a cavalier will start to pick up some basic spellcasting ability, and obviously he starts off with some pretty nice immunities as well. So I think a cavalier is a nice kit for to keep him useful throughout the saga without me having to worry about dual classing a pure fighter. And obviously, because I don't really think of him as a paladin, I actually keepered his charisma to below the legal minimum for a paladin. But I don't think this will have any effect on the game mechanics. Not that I'm aware of, anyway. We'll see how it goes. Alright, next up we will skip her and we'll go straight to Jin. Now, Jin, of course, is the star of this YouTube channel, as well as the protagonist of the first ever Let's Play series that I've completed with Baldur's Gate 2 Vanilla. You may remember that he was a half-elf fighter mage for the Baldur's Gate 2 playthrough, but for this Black Pits playthrough I have rebooted him as a human, pure class Kensai, with the intention of dual classing into a mage. Although I don't think we'll actually get there in Black Pits 1. I expect he will probably be a pure Kensai for the entirety of Black Pits 1, depending on how much experience, what the XP cap is for the Black Pits. I guess we'll find out. Now, I actually always intended for Jin to be a Kensai mage, and only rolled with a fighter mage for my first full saga blind playthrough, for the sake of simplicity, to be honest, so that I didn't have to worry about the mechanics of dual classing, or worry about picking a weapon specialization when I had no idea what weapons I'd come across in the game, or necessarily what those could. The reason why I've always intended for Jin to be a Kensai mage is because his character is very much inspired by the Chinese wuxia genre. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically the Chinese version of Western fantasy. And instead of elves and wizards, you've got martial artists whose techniques are so advanced that they appear magical in nature. The heroes and villains of wuxia almost never wear armor, at least they're never depicted wearing armor. So a Kensai mage is almost perfect for capturing their martial and magical abilities, as well as, I guess, the aversion to armored protection, as they're typically seen relying on superhuman abilities and evasion skills to avoid injury, rather than get in 60 pounds of metal plates. Well, actually, the most famous example of the wuxia genre you might have seen is the movie Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tiger, which was pretty popular a couple of years ago. Well, actually more than a couple of years ago now. But actually in China, the king of wuxia is an author by the name of Jin Yong, and his epic series of 15 novels have produced, dozens of TV series that cover the equivalent of about, perhaps about 1,000 years of fantasy Chinese history. It's absolutely epic. I absolutely love the setting and the characters that they have. So Jin is very much inspired by that kind of setting. So I guess that explains the mechanics of the character. Incidentally, I've decided that he will specialize in long swords, because he's supposed to be a character of Shou origin, or Shou Long origin, which is the Forgotten Realms version of medieval China, not Japan. And so I'm quite keen to get away from the stereotype of the Asian dude with the katana. I've actually got no idea what the best weapons are going to be in the Black Pits, but I figured I can't go too far wrong with long swords, which is probably a fairly safe choice for a weapon specialization. Whilst we are on the topic of weapon proficiencies, I'd like to quickly point out that Heindrich's specialty is currently bastard swords, although I expect he will end up being proficient in probably a wide range of weapons, since a paladin cannot specialize anyway. And I think flexibility is actually going to be pretty useful, and I don't really know what weapons I can find in Black Pits, and what enemies we will face. Now back to Jin. Given that he's the star of this channel, it's probably perhaps a bit surprising that I've never actually explained his origins. So here goes. The character of Jin was created for a novel that I have had the vague ambition of writing for a fairly long time. I created I've already created a fairly detailed setting, as well as detailed profiles for most of the key characters, including Jin. Just haven't quite got around to seriously writing the story itself. What I do have, however, is essentially a ready-made character that I strongly identify and relate with, and one that I can use for all sorts of role-playing games. What I mean by that is Jin's character, personality, attributes, and attitudes, as opposed to specific skills or professions, which would obviously depend on the specific settings of the game. because obviously you can't really be a mage, for example. We're in a sci-fi setting. But his personality and attributes certainly are transferable across all sorts of genres. And that's kind of the idea that I'm building on with this channel as well. In the very long run, I may move away from the Baldur's Gate games, and in that case, Jin probably won't be a Kenzai mage type of character. Who knows? It depends on the setting. Now, you might have also heard me call him by a slightly different name, Sima Jin, or pronounce it slightly differently. Now, Sima Jin is the correct Chinese pronunciation for his name, but I usually just call him Jin. And the reason for that is, although I am a native speaker, a bilingual speaker of Chinese Mandarin and English, obviously, I've always found Chinese words to be kind of awkward when used in the middle of an English sentence. It just doesn't flow very well. And most English people, or English speakers I guess, tend to pronounce Chinese words in a very particular way that flows better in English. So I've kind of long gotten used to, I guess, deliberately mispronouncing Chinese words and speaking in English, even for my own name. But in case you are curious, Sima is Jin's surname because Chinese people put their family names ahead of their given names, which I guess reflects on the importance of family in traditional Confucian culture. Sima vaguely means horsemaster, and it was a fairly common surname in ancient times, which is why I quite like to use it for my fantasy games, because it sort of fits the setting better when the surname itself is associated more with historical figures as opposed to modern day ones. And the Sima clan were ultimately the victors of the famous Three Kingdoms period, which you might have heard of from the Dynasty Warriors games, or movies like the Red Cliffs, which I think was released in the West as well. Jin, or Jin as I usually call them, is the Chinese word for advance or improve, and reflects his parents' hopes that he would overcome the illnesses that plagued the early lives of the earlier years of his life as an infant. So yeah, that's I guess the fluff behind the character of the star of this channel. There's quite a lot of detail about Jin. So moving on, let's talk about Kang, his half-brother sorcerer. Sima Kang, or Kang as I'll call him, is a character that I created for a full saga roleplay focused multiplayer game of Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition that I've been playing with a few forumites from the Enhanced Edition forums, which I'm having great fun with. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. Whilst we're on the topic of the Sima brothers, both of their portraits were created by a super generous and super talented artist who I also met on the Enhanced Edition forum. Kang's portrait is originally for a character called, I guess that's pronounced Vane, or Vane, I'm not entirely sure, which is a character for a Baldur's Gate mod called Dark Side of the Sword Coast. The artist is called Isendir or Isendir, again, I'm not entirely sure. And the link to his amazing collection is included in the information box below. Although obviously do credit him properly and ask for his permission if you intend to use his work for anything beyond personal use. The portrait for Jin actually shares some of the same elements as that of Kang. You might notice that the robes look awfully similar, but Jin's portrait is otherwise totally unique, and that's because Isendir very kindly agreed to create it as a photo manipulation of a photograph of myself that I provided I cannot put into words how grateful I am for his amazing work. I mean, this dude looks like me, but also looks totally at home amongst the default Baldur's Gate portraits like I've got for Lilly and Heindrich, and it's really helped me to immerse myself even more into these games. And I love these portraits so much that I decided to use them both, even though Kang doesn't really look particularly oriental, but so I've had to pretend that he's Jin's half-brother, perhaps born to a mother of Faerunian blood, following their arrival in Fant, or I guess following his father's arrival in Fant, as a refugee from the nomad invasions that ravaged Shaolin about 20 years ago. This seems to be the main justification I've read about for the presence of Easterners, or more specifically characters from Shaolin to be found in Faerun. Anyway, back to Kang. Now, personality-wise, the power and prestige of being a naturally gifted spellcaster or sorcerer, to be more precise, has clearly gone to his head. Kang is vain, arrogant, confident, and yet sometimes cowardly. He's selfish, petty, and vengeful. He's very much lawful neutral rather than lawful good. And I guess in some ways he represents an exaggeration of Jin's worst attributes, or what he could become in different circumstances, I guess. Kang is, for want of a better word, a bit of a douche, as my multiplayer partners will attest to. In terms of game mechanics, it's pretty simple. He's just a simple vanilla sorcerer, although given that sorcerers don't have any primary stats, despite his mediocre stats, I expect Kang will be quite a powerhouse compared to Jin, who is likely to be probably mostly useless for Black Pits 1. Anyway, that covers the Sima brothers. Moving on now to the two characters that I've modded, starting with Little Dragon.